My mother pointed to a tiny table beside the service door and smiled. Sit by the trash. That's where freeloaders belong. Dad didn't even lower his voice. You didn't pay for anything, Sophie. Know your place. For 36 years, I'd been trained to swallow words like that and keep helping anyway. This time, I stood. You're right, I won't pay for anything. 10 minutes later, the venue coordinator walked straight to my parents' table and placed the final statement in front of them. Dad's face drained of color. $42,000 outstanding. He called me over. You said you'd handle this. I looked at the bill, then at him. I'm not on the contract. And that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because the next morning, my aunt sent me one message. Sophie, what happened to all the money we sent for you? But I'm getting ahead of myself. That morning, before my mother told me I belonged beside the trash, I had spent 3 hours making sure my sister's wedding ran on time. Emily had texted me at 6:43. Can you check the final vendor sheet? Mom is freaking out. At 6:50, I was sitting at the little desk in my hotel room with coffee going cold beside my laptop. That was what people in my family meant when they said I was good with paperwork. I was a grant compliance manager for a community development nonprofit in Raleigh. My actual job involved tracing funds, verifying documentation, checking whether money had been used for the purpose people claimed, and finding the kind of small inconsistencies that turned into large problems when nobody paid attention. My family reduced all of that to Sophie likes spreadsheets. Emily had sent me the reception invoice, guest count changes, revised staffing sheet, premium bar estimate, rental additions, and the latest email from the venue coordinator, Caroline. I caught 2 duplicate chair charges and a staffing extension that hadn't been reflected in the latest estimate. Caroline fixed both. Emily sent me 3 heart emojis. Mom sent, "See? This is why family needs you." I should have noticed the wording. Not "we appreciate you." Not "thank you." Family needs you. There was a difference. I just wasn't ready to name it yet. By 11, I was at the venue helping Emily find a missing garment bag and reminding Dad that the shuttle schedule had changed. By 1, I had already solved a florist delivery mix-up that technically had nothing to do with me. By 3, I was standing in the bridal suite pinning the back of Emily's veil because the stylist had gone downstairs. "You're a lifesaver," Emily said. She looked beautiful. I mean that, without bitterness. Emily had always been beautiful in the effortless way our mother admired. Blonde hair that held a curl. A laugh that made people turn toward her. The kind of face Mom described as photogenic, which was apparently a moral quality in our house. I was the older daughter who remembered due dates. Emily was the daughter people remembered. I smoothed the veil. "You ready?" She looked at herself in the mirror. Almost. Then her eyes shifted to me. "Mom said you're still okay helping with the final balance, right?" There it was. Not paying it, helping. That was how it had been presented from the beginning. Mom and Dad were the ones who had signed the venue contract. Emily and Daniel were paying for some parts of the wedding themselves. Daniel's parents were covering the rehearsal dinner. I had already paid for several smaller things as my gift, some vendor deposits, transportation, and part of the rentals. A few weeks earlier, Emily had asked whether I could help if the final venue reconciliation came in higher than expected. I told her I would look at it after the reception and, if the number was reasonable, I could probably help. No written guarantee. No fixed amount. No signature. Just me doing what I always did. Leaving a door open so my family wouldn't have to feel the consequences of their own budget. I said I'd look at it. I reminded her. Emily's smile tightened by half an inch. You know what I mean. I did. And that was the problem. The ceremony itself was lovely. Daniel cried when Emily walked down the aisle. Dad cried when he handed her off. Mom cried loudly enough for the second row to notice. I sat 3 seats from the aisle beside Aunt Rebecca. Rebecca squeezed my hand once when Emily reached the altar. "You did a beautiful job helping with all this," she whispered. I smiled. "Thanks." She looked like she wanted to say something else, then didn't. I thought nothing of it. I would remember that moment very differently the next morning. After the ceremony, everyone moved toward the ballroom. I stayed back long enough to answer one question from Caroline about the bar extension. She had gotten used to coming to me during the planning because Emily forwarded most billing emails to me with some version of, "Can you translate this?" Caroline knew exactly what my role was. I reviewed. I clarified. I asked annoying questions. I did not sign anything. That distinction would matter very soon. Inside the ballroom, place cards sat on a long table under strings of warm lights. I found Daniel, then Emily, then Mom, then Dad. My name wasn't with them. I checked again. A server passing behind me pointed toward a smaller table near a service door. "Sophie Carter?" "Yes. I think you're over there." I followed his finger. The table was technically inside the reception space, but barely. One side faced the ballroom. The other faced a swinging service door. Beyond it, staff were carrying trays, empty boxes, and black trash bags toward the back corridor. My place card sat beside a decorative vase. For 1 second, I genuinely thought there had been a seating mistake. Then I heard Mom. "Oh, good, you found it." I turned. She was holding a champagne glass. Dad stood beside her. Emily was a few feet away talking to Daniel. "Mom, why am I sitting here?" She gave me that little smile she used when she wanted an insult to sound like a joke. "Sit by the trash. That's where freeloaders belong." My fingers went cold around the place card. A cousin nearby stopped talking. A server looked down. Dad chuckled once. Then he added, "You didn't pay for anything, Sophie. Know your place." That line did something the insult itself didn't. It simplified everything. All morning I had been correcting invoices. All month I had been sending payments. For years, apparently, I had been doing the same thing emotionally, covering whatever gap appeared between what my family did and what they wanted the world to think they did. And my father had just stood in a ballroom and told me none of it counted. I saw Aunt Rebecca, several yards away. Her eyes met mine. Her mouth opened. Then she looked down at her glass. At the time, I thought she was embarrassed for me. Emily crossed over quickly. "Can we not do this today?" I stared at her. "I didn't do anything." "I know. But Mom's stressed." Of course. Mom was stressed. Dad was joking. Emily was getting married. There was always a reason somebody else's behavior required my silence. I looked past them at the family table. On one empty chair sat the blue venue folder I had reviewed that morning. And something in me went very still. I had spent years thinking strength would feel like anger. It didn't. It felt like finally being too tired to perform the same trick again. I stood. Mom frowned. "Sophie, you're right." Dad raised his eyebrows. I picked up my phone. "I won't pay for anything." Emily's face changed first. "What?" I stepped away from them and opened my email thread with Caroline. My thumbs were steady. "Hi Caroline. Please note that I am withdrawing my voluntary offer to help cover any remaining reception balance. I am not a signer or guarantor on the venue agreement. Please direct final billing to the contract signers, Mark and Linda Carter. Thank you. Send." Mom followed me 2 steps. "What did you just do?" I clarified the billing contact. Her expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous." Maybe, but I had never felt less confused. I didn't sit at the table near the trash. I walked into the hallway instead. Caroline found me there about 7 minutes later. "Sophie?" "Yes." She held her tablet against her chest. "I got your email." "Okay. I just want to confirm you're no longer acting as the voluntary payer for the final balance?" "That's correct." She nodded professionally. "No problem. You were never the contracting party anyway. I'll take the final reconciliation to your parents." There was no drama in her voice. No judgment. Just procedure. I almost laughed. It was amazing how simple life became when somebody actually respected what a document said. "Do you know the final number?" I asked. She exhaled. "It came in higher than the preliminary estimate." "How high?" 42,000. I blinked. Even I hadn't expected that. She quickly explained. There was still contracted balance outstanding, plus bar overage, an extra hour of staffing, the extended reception time, and the late guest count additions. No mysterious penalty. No absurd damage charge. Just a very expensive wedding whose last pieces had finally been added together. I nodded. "Thank you. You're sure you don't want me to bring it to you first?" I'm sure. Caroline walked back into the ballroom. I stayed in the hallway. I could have left. Instead, I went back inside because some small, stubborn part of me wanted to see what happened when a bill finally landed where the contract said it belonged. Caroline went directly to Mom and Dad's table. Not mine. She placed the folder in front of Dad. He opened it. His face changed. Mom leaned closer. Then both of them looked straight at me. Dad raised his hand. Sophie, come here. I almost didn't. Then I thought about every time they had called me dramatic for wanting facts. So, I walked over. Dad tapped the page. $42,000? I heard. You said you'd handle this. Daniel looked from Dad to me. Emily had gone pale. I kept my voice level. I said I would consider helping with the final reconciliation. You committed to it, Mom snapped. No, I didn't. Dad pushed the folder toward me. Stop playing games. I didn't touch it. I'm not on the contract. Daniel spoke before anyone else could. Who is? Mom's head turned toward him. Caroline, still standing near the table, answered, because it was a factual question. Mr. and Mrs. Carter are the contracting signers. Daniel looked at Emily. I thought your parents said the reception was covered. Emily swallowed. Sophie was supposed to handle the rest. Daniel looked back at me. Were you ever on the contract? No. That was all I said. He nodded slowly. Not at me. At the information. And for the first time that evening, I realized he had been told a version of our family finances that did not match the reality sitting on the table. Dad slapped one palm flat against the folder. We are not discussing family business in front of strangers. Caroline stepped away immediately. Daniel didn't. It's my wedding bill too. Dad had no answer for that. Daniel pulled Emily aside a few feet, but I didn't pretend I could hear their whole conversation. What I did hear was him say, "We are not leaving this unresolved tonight." 10 minutes later, Emily returned with red-rimmed eyes. She and Daniel had $17,000 remaining in the fund they had intended to use for their honeymoon and furnishing their new house. They were putting it toward the balance. Mom protested. Daniel said, calmly, "We hosted the wedding. We'll pay what we can." Dad and Mom arranged with Caroline to put the remaining $25,000 on a payment schedule. Nobody applauded. Nobody collapsed. The wedding continued. Music played. People danced. The cake was cut, and yet, something fundamental had changed. For once, a family crisis had happened in front of me without automatically becoming mine to solve. As I was leaving, Daniel caught me near the lobby. He looked tired. "Can I ask you one thing?" "Sure. Were you ever legally responsible for any part of that final invoice?" "No. You were just offering to help?" "Yes." He nodded. "Okay." Then he walked back toward the ballroom. He didn't tell me I was right. He didn't tell me Emily was wrong. He simply took the fact and carried it with him. That mattered more than I understood at the time. Outside, I sat in my car without starting the engine. My hands had finally begun to shake. I called Priya. She answered on the second ring. "Wedding over?" "Technically." "That sounds ominous." I told her what happened. Not every childhood wound. Not every time Mom chose Emily. Just the sequence. Seating. Insult. Email. Contract. 42,000. Priya listened. Then she asked, "What did you actually agree to in writing?" I let out a breath. "Nothing specific." "Did you sign the venue agreement?" "No." "Guarantee the balance?" "No." "Promise a fixed amount?" "No." I stared through the windshield at the venue lights. "Then why do you sound like you stole $42,000? I closed my eyes. Because that was exactly how I felt. Like money I had never legally owed had somehow already belonged to them. "Because they took me in," I said. Priya was quiet. 2 years earlier, when I discovered my husband had been sleeping with a coworker, I had left our house with 2 suitcases and spent 11 months in the carriage apartment behind my parents' home. Mom had told me, "Come home, we don't keep score." I paid $1,400 a month. Utilities were mostly included, but I bought my own groceries and covered other expenses. At the time, I didn't think of it as proving anything. I needed somewhere familiar while my marriage came apart. I was grateful. I was also paying. Both things had been true. Somehow, over time, my family had kept only one of them. Priya said, You still have your records from that year? I almost smiled. Of course I do. At work, people joked that I kept receipts for breathing. After my divorce, I had created a folder called Rebuild, rent transfers, pay stubs, moving receipts, the email confirming I had returned to full-time hours. My new lease. I had needed those documents back then because facts felt safer than memory. Don't do anything tonight, Priya said. I wasn't planning to. Good. I looked back at the ballroom. For once, I believed myself. The next morning, I woke to 19 missed calls. Mom had posted in the family group before 8. Sophie humiliated us over money on Emily's wedding night. After everything we've done for her. Dad added. Some people never learn gratitude. Emily didn't write anything. I put the phone down, made coffee, opened my laptop. Then another message arrived. Private. Aunt Rebecca. I know last night got ugly. I'm sorry. I just hope the money we sent back then at least helped you get back on your feet. I read it once. Then again. I typed. What money? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally she sent a screenshot. A bank transfer. 2 years earlier. Send 10 by Mei Yuan. The memo line read. For Sophie rent. Help. I stopped breathing for a second. I had never received $3,500 from Rebecca. Not directly. Not through Mom. Not as a refund. Nothing. I typed. Why did you send this to Mom? Rebecca replied. She said you didn't want anyone sending money directly, because you were embarrassed. Then another screenshot appeared. A text from my mother. Please don't send it to Sophie directly. She's embarrassed. I sat very still. Then I opened Rebuild. It took less than a minute to find the month. There it was. My rent transfer to my parents. Each by Mei Yuan. Utilities paid according to our agreement. A pay stub. And 3 weeks later, the email confirming my return to full-time status. I opened a spreadsheet. At the top, I created 5 columns. Date. Claim made about me. What I can verify. Money sent by whom. What I actually received. The first row belonged to Rebecca. Then I called her. She answered quietly. Hi, Rebecca. Did Mom ask anyone else for money for me? Silence. Long enough that I could hear the faint hum of her refrigerator through the phone. Rebecca? Her voice dropped. Sophie. Another pause. Then she said the words that changed the entire story. I thought you knew. I thought you knew. Rebecca's words sat between us. For a second, all I could hear was the hum of my refrigerator and a delivery truck grinding through the intersection outside my apartment. Knew what? I asked. Her breath caught softly through the phone. That your mother had been asking people to help. How many people? I don't know. Rebecca. I really don't, Sophie. The old version of me would have filled the silence for her. I would have said it was okay, told her not to worry, softened my questions until she no longer had to feel uncomfortable about an uncomfortable truth. Instead, my eyes stayed on the spreadsheet. Did you send more than the $3,500? Another pause. Yes. How much? Another $1,500 a few months later. $5,000. The number didn't feel enormous. That almost made it worse. 5,000 was ordinary enough to disappear into a household budget, a credit card balance, a home repair. Ordinary enough that nobody would call the police or summon a lawyer. Ordinary enough that my mother could probably convince herself she had done nothing wrong. But Rebecca had sent it because she believed I needed help, and I had never known. Can we meet? I asked. She agreed to a coffee shop near her office just before lunch. By the time I arrived, Rebecca was already sitting at a corner table with her handbag zipped tightly beside her chair. The wedding version of her had been polished and composed in navy silk. Today she looked smaller. A paper folder rested beside her coffee. I printed everything I could find, she said. That sentence tightened something in my chest, not because I expected a dramatic confession, because Rebecca had clearly spent her morning searching. She slid the folder toward me. Inside were 2 bank confirmations. The first was the $3,500 I had already seen. The second was $1,500, sent about 7 months later. Both had gone to Mom. Both mentioned me. The later one said, for Sophie. Groceries and whatever she needs. Rebecca watched my face. I thought she was passing it along. She wasn't. I'm sorry. My thumb moved down the edge of the paper. Why didn't you ever ask me? Color rose along her neck. Linda said you didn't want people discussing money with you. That was enough? It wasn't just that. Rebecca opened her phone and found another message. Mom had written. She's trying to keep her dignity. She gives us little amounts now and then so she doesn't feel like charity. Please don't make her explain herself. Something inside me went absolutely still. Little amounts. For 11 months, $1,400 had left my account on the third business day of every month. Not when I remembered. Not when I happened to have extra. Every month. The carriage apartment behind my parents' house had its own entrance, a small kitchen, a bedroom and a living room barely wide enough for a couch and a desk. Most utilities were included. I bought my groceries separately. $1,400 had been close enough to market rent that, when I eventually moved into my current apartment, the difference wasn't dramatic. Mom had turned it into pocket change. Did she tell you I was unemployed? I asked. Rebecca's eyes lowered. She said you were having trouble finding your footing after the divorce. That's not what I asked. A faint wince crossed her face. Yes. She said you weren't really working. For how long? Most of that first year. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup. For the first few months after leaving my husband, I had reduced my schedule while sorting out the divorce and moving. Then I had gone back full-time. Mom knew that. She had congratulated me with a grocery store cake. Rebecca pulled up another screenshot. Emily has been wonderful through all of this. She helps Sophie whenever she can. Such a good sister. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not because anything was funny. Rebecca looked up. What? Emily never gave me money. Never? Not a dollar. Rebecca's eyebrows drew together. She didn't help with your rent? No. Groceries? No. Your moving costs? No. The coffee shop seemed louder all at once. Cups struck saucers. A blender whined behind the counter. Someone laughed near the door. Rebecca stared at the messages on her screen, as if the words might rearrange themselves if she waited. She told me Emily was helping. I'm sure she did. My voice sounded flatter than I felt. Then I remembered Rebecca at the wedding. The way her eyes had met mine before she looked away. Last night, I said, when Mom called me a freeloader. Why didn't you say anything? Rebecca flinched. There it was. The question she had probably been hoping I wouldn't ask. I thought, what? I thought she was angry because of the money. The money you sent? Yes. My stomach turned. Rebecca rubbed one palm over the other. Linda made it sound like you knew people had helped. I thought maybe you were embarrassed because you still owed everyone in some way. When she said that terrible thing, I didn't know whether saying anything would make it worse. So you looked away. I did. She didn't defend herself. That mattered. Not enough to erase it, but enough that I didn't have to fight through another layer of denial. Rebecca took a breath. I should have asked you directly. Yes. The word came easier than I expected. No apology rushed after it. No reassurance that she had meant well. Just yes. Her eyes met mine again. What do you want me to do? For now? Nothing. She looked surprised. I need copies of anything you're comfortable giving me. Original screenshots if possible. Bank confirmations. Dates. You think your mother took the money? I think you sent money believing it was for me. I know I didn't receive it. Those are the facts I have. Saying it that way steadied me. Not theft. Not fraud. Not conspiracy. Facts. Rebecca nodded. One more thing, I said. If anyone ever asks you to send money for me again, call me. I will. Not Mom, me. I understand. Walking back to my car, I had $5,000 worth of questions in my bag and one new rule in my life. If something was supposedly about me, people no longer got to protect my dignity by keeping me out of it. That afternoon, Priya found me staring at a spreadsheet during lunch. Please tell me that's not work. It's worse. She sat across from me. The break room smelled like reheated pasta and burnt coffee. I turned the laptop slightly so she could see the columns. Known sender. Exact claim. Verifiable fact. Amount. What I received. Priya scanned the first few rows. You're treating this like a compliance review. That's the only way I know how to keep from calling my mother and screaming. Then don't call her yet. Her response was so simple that my shoulders loosened. I keep wanting to prove what she did. Wrong question. I frowned. Priya tapped one finger lightly beside the spreadsheet. Don't build a case against your mother, build a record of what happened. The distinction landed harder than I expected. A case required a villain. A record required dates. That's annoying, I said. I know. Because it's good advice. I know that too. For the first time since Rebecca's message, I smiled. Then, my calendar notification popped up. Post-wedding gift returns Saturday. Below it, help mom organize leftover decor Sunday. Neither event had been my idea. Both had been added after Emily sent me a list headed, things we still need to get done. Need. That word again. My fingers hovered over the calendar. Then I deleted both events. Priya noticed. Big rebellion? Apparently I'm no longer available to sort candle holders. Terrifying. The empty weekend appeared in front of me. A ridiculous amount of relief came with it. Next, I opened my banking app. For 3 months, I had reduced the automatic transfer into my own emergency savings because I wanted extra cash available in case wedding costs ran high. That decision had made sense when helping was voluntary. It no longer did. The old amount went back into place. Confirmation flashed across the screen. 100% ordinary. No dramatic music. No applause. Just my money going back toward my life. By the following evening, 3 relatives had answered my careful messages. Uncle David was first. Mom had told him I was between jobs and struggling with rent. He had sent $4,000. Cousin Hannah believed the money she sent was helping with therapy and moving expenses. Rebecca believed hers covered groceries and rent. 3 people. 3 explanations. One woman in the middle of all of them. A pattern was beginning to form. Then David forwarded his transfer confirmation. The memo line made my hand stop on the mouse. Sophie, wedding later. I called him. What does wedding later mean? David sounded confused. Your mother said once you were stable, anything left could help get Emily started. Started with what? The wedding fund, I assumed. Did she tell you I agreed to that? I thought you had. No. Silence. Then David said, she made it sound like the whole thing was temporary. Help Sophie first, then whatever was left stays in the family. I wrote his exact words in my notes. Not because I believed every memory was automatically accurate. Because his version gave me something new to compare. Did Mom tell you not to contact me? She said you were humiliated about the divorce. That word again. Humiliated. My mother had found the one part of those months I truly did not want to discuss and built a fence around it. Anyone approaching the truth was told they were protecting me by staying away. After the call, another message came in. Emily, Daniel keeps asking why you were expected to pay if Mom says you never help. This is becoming ridiculous. I stared at it. Then she called. What exactly did you tell him? I asked. Emily exhaled sharply. Can we not turn my marriage into part of this? I didn't. You walked away from $42,000 on our wedding night. No, I declined to give you $42,000. That is not how it felt. That doesn't change what happened. Her breath came fast through the phone. Daniel thinks Mom lied to him. What did Mom tell him? That our parents were covering the reception. And what did you tell him? Why does that matter? Because when the bill arrived, you said I was supposed to handle the rest. That was the plan. Whose plan? Emily went quiet. The answer mattered more than another argument. Did you ever tell Daniel you helped support me after my divorce? That's not what I said. What did you say? Mom said we all helped you. There it was again. Not an answer. A borrowed sentence. How much did you personally give me? That's insulting. How much? You know support isn't only money. Then stop letting people believe it was. Her voice sharpened. You are making everything transactional. No. I'm asking what actually happened. A few seconds passed. Then Emily said, I can't do this right now. The call ended. Less than an hour later, a text arrived from Daniel. For my own records, were you ever legally responsible for the final venue balance? No accusation. No invitation to complain about Emily. Just a question. No. I offered voluntary help. I was not a signer or guarantor. His reply came almost immediately. Understood, thank you. That was it. He didn't ask me to explain my family. He didn't tell me he believed me. He simply checked a fact. The simplicity of it made my mother's system look stranger. At work, people asked the source. At the venue, Caroline checked the contract. Daniel asked who was legally responsible. Only inside my family was asking for verification, treated like an act of aggression. That night, the transfer from Uncle David kept bothering me. Not the amount. The date. $4,000 had reached Mom and Dad's account according to David's confirmation on a Tuesday. 3 days later, an email in the old wedding planning folder showed Mom had paid $2,500 to a wedding consultant. My pulse jumped. For about 10 seconds, the story assembled itself in my head. David sent money for me. Mom used it for Emily. There it was. Except it wasn't. The timing was suspicious. Timing was not tracing. Mom and Dad had other money in their account. Household funds moved constantly. Without their bank records, which I did not have and had no right to access, there was no legitimate way for me to claim David's exact dollars became Emily's deposit. So I typed, household received $4,000 after claim involving Sophie. 3 days later, household made $2,500 wedding-related payment. Source tracing unknown. It looked less satisfying than an accusation. It was also honest. Then, an old email surfaced in the search results. Mom had sent it to me, Emily and Dad, during early wedding planning. Once Sophie is back on her feet, we can finally focus on Emily's wedding fund. The date made me lean closer to the screen. By then, I had already been working full-time for months. 2 weeks after that email, according to Rebecca's screenshots, Mom was still telling people I could barely buy groceries. My phone rang. Dad. For one childish second, I hoped he was calling because he had decided to tell me the truth. Instead, he said, "Are you home?" "Yes. I'm downstairs." 10 minutes later, he sat on my couch. His eyes moved over my apartment, the couch I had bought, the shelves I had assembled, the framed certificate from work, as if the room itself had become inconvenient evidence. "We need to stop this before it gets out of hand," he said. "What is this? You calling relatives about private family matters? They sent money for me. They sent money to us. Because they were told I needed it." Dad leaned back. "Your mother never stole from you." "I didn't say she did." "Then what are you accusing her of?" "I'm asking what people were told." "Everyone knew we were helping you." "Did everyone know I was paying $1,400 a month?" His jaw tightened. "You paid something." "Something." My whole body reacted before my mind caught up. The 3rd of every month. The bank notification. The small relief each time I saw the transfer clear, because it meant I had covered another month without asking anyone to carry me. Something. Without speaking, I opened Rebuild on my laptop and turned the screen toward him. 11 payments. Same amount. Same destination. His eyes flicked across them. Then he looked away. "Your mother gave you a place when you needed one." "Yes." "You think rent covered everything we did for you emotionally?" "No." "Then why are you behaving like this is an audit?" "Because people sent money for expenses I was already paying. It went into the household anyway." "Did Mom ask for it?" Dad rubbed his forehead. "People wanted to help." "What were they told?" "Sophie, did you know she told Rebecca my rent was just a little amount I paid to protect my dignity?" He didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough to keep going. "Did you know she told David I was between jobs?" "You were struggling." "That's not the same thing. Family doesn't keep score." The sentence fell into the room. It sounded different now. For years, those words had meant generosity to me. Suddenly they sounded like instructions. Don't compare. Don't verify. Don't ask where the money went. "Then why has everyone been keeping score against me?" I asked. Dad's face tightened. "This is exactly what your mother was afraid of. Turning everything into numbers. The numbers are the only part that hasn't changed." He stood. "We had bills, Sophie. We had the house. We were trying to get Emily's deposits covered too." The room seemed to contract. Dad stopped. His mouth closed. Then he waved one hand. "I mean family expenses. There were a lot of expenses. I didn't chase him. Didn't demand a confession. Didn't tell him he had just revealed something. Instead, I wrote the sentence down after he left. Mark. We were trying to get Emily's deposits covered too. Clarified as general family expenses. A statement. A correction. Both recorded. That was enough. Around 9 that night, Rebecca sent another message. Found one more. I think you need to see this. The screenshot loaded. Mom's name sat at the top. The date was 4 months after I had moved out of the carriage apartment and signed the lease on my current place. Her message read, "Don't mention the wedding part to Sophie. She's still sensitive about money." For several seconds, I didn't move. There was no crisis left by then. No carriage apartment. No reduced work schedule. No reason anyone needed to protect my dignity. I had my own lease, my own salary, my own life. And Mom was still using my name. That was when the question finally changed. It was no longer whether my mother had exaggerated how badly I was doing. It was why she still needed me to be failing after I had already gotten back up. The question followed me into Monday morning. Why did Mom still need me to be failing after I had already gotten back up? For the first hour at work, I tried to ignore it. There were grant reports waiting in my inbox, 2 reimbursement requests with missing documentation, and a program manager who had somehow submitted the same invoice twice under 2 different project codes. Normally, that kind of work calmed me. Facts stayed where you put them. Dates didn't get offended when you compared them. A bank transfer couldn't accuse you of being ungrateful because you noticed it existed. By 11, pretending the question wasn't there had become more distracting than answering it. At lunch, instead of opening my spreadsheet, I printed the dates I already had and took them home with me that evening. The papers covered most of my living room floor. Divorce filing. Move-in date at my parents' carriage apartment. First rent payment. Reduced work schedule. Return to full-time hours. 11 rent transfers. Move-out date. New lease. Emily's engagement dinner. Rebecca's transfers. David's transfer. The early wedding planning emails. The first deposit I could verify had been paid toward Emily's wedding. Nothing looked dramatic by itself. That was usually how patterns worked. They didn't announce themselves. They waited for somebody to stop looking at the story and start looking at the sequence. A yellow sticky note marked the month I had returned to full-time work. Another marked the month I moved into my current apartment. After that point, there should have been no reason for anyone to tell relatives I was struggling to cover rent. Yet Rebecca's screenshots continued. So did David's recollection. So did the messages describing me as fragile, embarrassed, overwhelmed, still unable to manage on my own. My eyes moved from one date to the next. Then something else caught my attention. The strongest descriptions of me being in trouble seemed to cluster around moments when someone in the house needed something. A home repair, a shortfall, a wedding expense. An invitation for somebody to step in and help. Not always money. Sometimes attention. Sometimes sympathy. Sometimes the kind of moral credit my mother loved collecting without ever calling it that. A memory came back so sharply that I reached for my phone before I even understood why. Emily's engagement dinner. There had been a group photo from that night. Mom had posted it in the family chat afterward. I searched until I found it. There we were, around a private table at an Italian restaurant. Emily in white. Daniel beside her. Mom leaning toward them. Dad with one hand lifted mid-toast. Me near the edge of the frame. The picture brought the sound back. Mom tapping her wineglass with a spoon. Emily has always been the strong one, she had said. She even helped us carry Sophie through the worst year of her life. People had smiled at Emily. Someone from Daniel's family had reached over and squeezed her hand. At the time, heat had climbed straight up my neck, not because the statement was true, because correcting it would have required me to explain things I desperately wanted left alone. My husband had cheated. I had moved home. I had spent weeks waking at 3 in the morning, wondering which part of my marriage had been real. Those were facts too. They just weren't facts I wanted turned into dinner conversation. So I had smiled. That smile had cost me more than I understood. By the night of Emily's engagement dinner, I had already been back at work full-time for months. I had been living in my own apartment for 5 months. Emily had never paid my rent, never covered my groceries, never paid a moving bill. Yet Mom had publicly converted Emily into the generous sister and me into the burden she had carried. The paper in my hand trembled once. I set it down. Then I wrote a question across the top page in thick black ink. What did my failure buy them? The answer was no longer just money. It bought Mom admiration. It made her the mother who never gave up on the difficult daughter. It made Emily look dependable without requiring her to actually support me. It gave Dad a reason to call every sacrifice they made enormous, while shrinking every payment I made into something. And most importantly, it kept me in debt after the numbers said the debt was over. Once I saw that, calling Mom felt less urgent. Setting a boundary felt more important. That distinction mattered. 2 days later, I drove to my parents' house after work. Mom opened the door, looked at the folder under my arm, and sighed before I said a word. You're really doing this. Doing what? Dragging this out. I asked if we could talk. You've been talking to everyone except us. That wasn't true, but arguing about the sentence would have taken me exactly where she wanted. Inside, Dad sat at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where I had filled out college forms, signed my first car loan paperwork, and cried into a mug after telling them my marriage was over. Mom pointed toward my usual chair. Sit down. My hand touched the back of it, then stopped. No. Her eyebrows lifted. What? I'll stand. Dad exhaled through his nose. Sophie, don't start with the theatrics. 3 pages came out of the folder. Not everything. A rent confirmation. The email showing the date I returned to full-time work, Rebecca's screenshot telling her not to send money directly to me. I placed them on the counter. I'm going to make this simple. Mom folded her arms. That would be a first. The insult passed through me without finding anywhere to land. You are not allowed to use my name, my divorce, my finances, my employment, or my mental state to ask anyone for money, favors, support, or sympathy. For the first time since I walked in, Mom's face changed. Allowed? Yes, I'm your mother. That doesn't make you my spokesperson. Her mouth opened. Dad stepped in. Everybody needs to calm down. I am calm. You're standing in our kitchen making demands. I'm stating a boundary. Mom let out a short laugh. Oh, listen to you. The old instinct rose fast. Explain more. Soften it. Make it sound less accusatory. Instead, my fingertips rested against the rent confirmation. Mom glanced down at it. We saved you. I know you gave me a place to stay. You had nowhere else to go. I know. Your husband had been sleeping with another woman. You were falling apart, and we kept your business private. That last sentence struck deeper than the others. Not because it was completely false, because it carried a threat inside something that sounded like kindness. We kept your business private, meaning they could stop, meaning my humiliation was still a currency Mom believed she held. For years, I had helped preserve that power by refusing to talk about what happened. The affair wasn't my shame, but I had treated it like one. He cheated, I said. I was hurt. Both are true. Mom's chin lifted slightly. So now you want everyone discussing it? No. I want you to stop using it to explain things that weren't true. What wasn't true? That I was unemployed for most of a year. You weren't yourself. That is not the same statement. That you couldn't afford groceries. We have already discussed this, Dad said. That Emily supported me financially. Mom's eyes flicked toward Dad. She supported this family. How much did she give me? This obsession with numbers is exactly why people find you difficult. There it was. When the facts became uncomfortable, the problem became my personality. My palm flattened against the counter. You told Rebecca my $1,400 a month was a token amount, so I wouldn't feel like charity. Mom shrugged. That is how I saw it. You saw $1,400 as nothing? We were doing more for you than rent could cover. That is not what you told people. We were protecting you. No, you were speaking for me. The room went quiet, except for the refrigerator motor cycling on behind Dad. Mom stared at me. Then her expression shifted into something almost weary. You know, Sophie, I have spent my entire life trying to keep this family together. Your sister gets married, and instead of being happy for her, you turn one ugly moment into an investigation. This didn't start at the wedding. It certainly exploded there. Because that was the first time I stopped paying. Dad pushed his chair back. That's enough. No, it isn't. My voice never rose. That seemed to unsettle them more than yelling would have. I pointed to the screenshot. Do not ask people for anything using my name. Mom's eyes hardened. And if somebody asks me how you're doing, tell them to ask me. That's ridiculous. It's direct. You don't get to control every conversation people have about you. No, but I do get to tell you not to claim you're raising money or support for me. You sound insane. The word landed cleanly. Not loud. Not accidental. I looked at her. Then at Dad. He stepped at the table. Nobody corrected her. Fine. I repeated the boundary. Slowly. Do not use my name, my divorce, my finances, or my mental state to ask anyone for money, favors, support, or sympathy. Mom's face tightened. If you do this, don't expect this family to keep choosing you. A year earlier, that sentence would have undone me. Even 6 months earlier, I might have stayed another hour trying to convince her that I loved everyone. This time, something else occurred to me. If belonging disappeared the moment I required the truth, then belonging had never been unconditional. The folder went back under my arm. Dad said my name. I kept walking. Behind me, Mom called. You always make everything harder than it has to be. My hand closed around the front door handle. Maybe, but this time, harder for them did not automatically mean wrong for me. The pressure started the next morning. A cousin texted before 7. Your mom is devastated. Another message came during my commute. Emily just got married. Can this not wait? By noon. Why are you auditing your own parents? Then. Some things are bigger than receipts, Sophie. That one almost made me laugh. Of course, some things were bigger than receipts. That was why the receipts mattered. They kept people from using something bigger, love, gratitude, shame, to replace what had actually happened. The family group chat had become unreadable by mid-afternoon. No one was asking whether I had paid rent. No one asked why Rebecca had been told not to contact me directly. The conversation had migrated immediately to my tone. My timing. My supposed lack of empathy. The old trap was sitting open in front of me. Defend every accusation. Explain every motive. Spend 6 hours proving I was still a good daughter. Instead, one message went into the group. I have asked Mom not to use my name to request money or insistence. If you personally sent money because you believed it was for me, you can contact me directly. I'm not discussing anyone else's finances. Send. 3 private messages arrived within an hour. I didn't open them immediately. At 8 that night, notifications went off. Not mute for 5 minutes. Not until Mom calls again. Off. The apartment felt strange without my phone vibrating across the counter. My laptop sat open beside it. A browser tab had been sitting there for nearly 3 weeks. Community Compliance Leadership Workshop application deadline Friday. I had opened the application twice before the wedding. Both times, something had interrupted. A seating chart emergency. Emily, needing help comparing rental invoices. Mom asking me to check whether a floral vendor had overcharged them. There had always been something. My cursor hovered over the application. The essay question asked why I wanted leadership training. For once, the answer had nothing to do with anyone in my family. I wanted to get better at work. I wanted to supervise a larger team eventually. I wanted a professional future that did not fit into the space left over after everybody else finished needing me. The application went in at 9:17. No one clapped. Nobody knew except me. That made it feel more mine. Rebecca called the next evening. I need to tell you something. The words made my stomach tighten. We met at the same coffee shop. This time she didn't bring a folder. She kept both hands around her cup. I asked Linda once why you were paying rent if things were as bad as she said. When? Maybe 5 months after you moved in. What did she say? That it wasn't really rent. My jaw tightened. She said you insisted on giving them something because you couldn't stand feeling like a charity case. $1,400 every month, reduced to therapy for my wounded pride. Rebecca continued. She told me asking you about money would make everything worse. So when Hannah asked me whether she should contact you directly, I told her not to. Something unpleasant twisted in my chest. You helped keep people from talking to me. Yes. Did you know the story was false? No, not like this. Her answer came quickly, but she didn't hide behind it. I knew pieces didn't make sense. I chose not to push. That distinction mattered. Rebecca had not created the story. She had made it easier for the story to survive. Why? You know your mother. I waited. Rebecca looked down. That's not a good enough answer, is it? No. She nodded. I didn't want the argument. There it was. No sinister motive. No secret partnership. Just the kind of decision people make every day when someone difficult controls a room. Avoid the conflict. Let somebody else absorb the cost. Rebecca looked at me. I thought asking you would embarrass you. It would have embarrassed Mom's story. Her lips pressed together. I think you're right. The apology didn't repair 2 years. Still, it was the first time anyone had named their part without immediately asking me to make them feel better about it. If something is about me, I said, ask me. I will. Even if Mom tells you not to, I will. We left it there. No hug, no grand reconciliation, just a new rule. Later that evening, Hannah sent me a screenshot. Your mom sent this 15 minutes ago. I thought you should see it. My mother's message appeared beneath it. Sophie is spiraling again. Please don't engage with her about money. She's still not over everything. The timestamp sat at the top. 2 days after I had stood in Mom's kitchen and told her specifically not to use my mental state to keep people from speaking to me. My body reacted before my mind did. Shoulders tight, tongue pressed against the back of my teeth. That old rush of doubt. Maybe I had been intense. Maybe printing documents had looked obsessive. Maybe everyone really did think I was. No, the thought stopped there. Mom had been told exactly what boundary I was setting. Her response was not to misunderstand it. Her response was to recreate the same barrier. Don't ask Sophie. Sophie is embarrassed had become Sophie is spiraling. Different explanation. Same result. Keep me out of conversations about me. A message from Emily arrived less than 20 minutes later. Daniel wants to know why Mom is telling people not to talk to you directly. What exactly are you saying to everyone? My thumb hovered over the screen. There was a time I would have rushed to protect her marriage. Explained that Daniel shouldn't worry. Told her I wasn't trying to turn him against anyone. Instead, I told people to contact me directly about claims involving me. That's all. Emily began typing. Stopped. Started again. No message came. Whatever conversation she and Daniel had next was theirs. I put the phone down. For the first time since the wedding, no urge followed to chase it. The next morning, Priya found an email from me waiting in her inbox. Attached was a backup copy of the chronology. Nothing from my employer. No confidential work documents. Just my records, the material relatives had sent voluntarily, and the notes I had made from conversations I personally had. She called during lunch. I saved it. Thanks. A pause. Then she asked, what do you actually want when this is over? That question sounds dangerous. I mean it. My first answer rose automatically. I want them to know I'm not a freeloader. But the sentence felt too small now. Even if every relative apologized tomorrow, Mom could invent another version next month. Even if Emily admitted she never paid my rent, I would still be waiting for other people to certify who I was. The folder sat beside my laptop. For 2 years, I had treated it as proof that I recovered. Maybe that wasn't what it was for anymore. I don't need everybody to agree about me, I said. Priya waited. My hand rested on the folder. I need them to stop using my name. The words came out quietly. But once they were in the room, the next step became obvious. I wasn't going to argue my mother into telling the truth. I was going to make sure she was no longer the only person holding the record. The next step sounded simple when I said it out loud. Make sure Mom was no longer the only person holding the record. Actually doing it took 3 nights. The first night, I opened everything and immediately hated how exposed it made me feel. Rent confirmations, employment dates, the lease for my current apartment, messages Rebecca had sent, David's transfer memo, Hannah's screenshots, the text where Mom told people not to contact me directly, the newer one, calling me spiraling, after I had explicitly asked her to stop speaking for my mental state. Each document was useful. Each document was also a piece of my life. I had never intended to circulate through a group of relatives. The temptation was to send all of it, every page, every screenshot, every contradiction. That would have felt satisfying for about 10 minutes. Then it would have become another version of losing control. So I started over. At work, one of the first things I taught newer staff was that more documentation did not automatically mean better documentation. Relevant mattered. Necessary mattered. Source mattered. The same rule had to apply to me. By midnight, the file was 5 pages. The first page listed what I had paid while living behind my parents' house. 11 months. $1,400 each month. Utilities mostly included. Groceries separate. No dramatic language. The second page gave the employment timeline. Reduced schedule after the divorce. Return to full-time work. Move-out date. New lease. The third page listed the things I had never authorized. I had never asked Mom to collect money for me. Never told anyone not to contact me because I was ashamed. Never asked Emily to financially support me. Never agreed that money raised because of my situation could later be used for wedding expenses. The fourth page contained only records relatives had voluntarily given me. Nothing from accounts I did not own. Nothing private I had somehow obtained. No guesses. The last page was shorter than all the others. Please do not send money, favors, or financial support for me through my parents. If someone tells you I need help, contact me directly. That was it. No accusation. No demand for repayment. No request that anyone choose me over Mom. Still, my finger would not click save. Priya was the only person I let read it. She called me 10 minutes after I emailed the draft. This is strong. That sounds ominous. It's boring. I laughed despite myself. Thank you? That's a compliment. Boring is good when people are expecting drama. She paused. There's one sentence you should change. Which one? You wrote, money intended for me was redirected to Emily's wedding. You don't know that. My stomach tightened because she was right. I know Mom accepted money because people thought it was helping me. Yes. And I know wedding payments happened around the same time. Yes. But I can't trace the same dollars. Exactly. The sentence came out. In its place, I wrote, some relatives were told that money sent because of my circumstances might later be used for wedding-related expenses. I was not informed of or asked to approve that arrangement. Less dramatic. More accurate. More mine. When the final version was done, Priya said, what happens now? I decide who actually needs this. Good. She didn't tell me whom to send it to. That decision was mine. There were 17 people I could have included. 17 names connected by marriages, cousins, group chats, holiday dinners, and years of Mom being the person everyone called first. I chose 8. 6 had personally sent money. 2 had recently received messages about my supposed mental state. Mark got a copy. Emily got a copy. Daniel did not. He had never sent money for me, and my relationship with my sister was not something I was going to prosecute through her husband. The family group chat did not get it. Social media did not get it. No mass email. No subject line, designed to make anyone gasp. Just people whose money, trust, or decisions had directly intersected with a story about me. Before I sent anything, another email arrived. For several seconds, I thought it was Mom. It wasn't. The subject line read, Community Compliance Leadership Workshop Acceptance. My application had been approved. I stared at the screen longer than the message required. The workshop wasn't glamorous. No promotion attached. No sudden salary increase. Just a 2-day professional program I had postponed, applying to twice, because somebody always needed something. The fee was due by Friday. 3 months earlier, I would have looked at that amount and thought about wedding overages, or Dad's car, or whether Mom might suddenly need help with a home repair. Instead, I opened my bank account. My emergency savings had started growing again after I restored the automatic transfer. I paid the workshop fee. Confirmation appeared. For the first time since the wedding, something important happened in my life that had nothing to do with correcting anybody else. That mattered enough that I closed the family folder for the rest of the night. The next morning, Emily was standing outside my apartment building when I returned from getting coffee. She hadn't called first. That irritated me more than I expected. You could have texted. I thought you might not answer. That doesn't make showing up better. Her mouth tightened. Can I come up? I almost said no. Then I looked at the envelope in her hand. 5 minutes. Upstairs, she stayed near the kitchen island. No one sat down. What's that? I asked. The budget Daniel asked me to go through. I didn't reach for it. That's between you and Daniel. I know. Then why are you here? Her eyes dropped for half a second. Because Mom says you're sending some kind of report to everybody. Not everybody. So you are. Yes. The word made her shoulders rise. Sophie, this is getting insane. Which part? Sending our private business around. I'm sending my financial history to people who sent money because they thought they were helping me. That's still our parents' business. No, my name is not their business. She pressed the envelope against the counter. Daniel thinks I lied to him. Did you? That's not fair. Then answer it, however you need to answer it. You know what Mom is like. I waited. Emily shook her head. This is what she does. She exaggerates. Everyone knows that. Daniel didn't. Her face changed. Only slightly. Enough. He's asking why I let his parents think I helped support you after your divorce. And I told him I helped in other ways. What ways? That's not the point. It becomes the point when the story is that you carried me financially. I never used those exact words. Did you correct anyone who did? She looked away. That answer didn't need translation. For years I had thought Emily's role was simple. Golden child. Mom's favorite. The one who received praise while I received responsibilities. Standing in my kitchen, I saw something less flattering and more ordinary. Emily had not built the entire story. She had simply accepted every advantage it gave her. I knew you paid rent, she said finally. My fingers curled around the edge of the counter. How long? I always knew you gave Mom and Dad money. That's not what I asked. Emily exhaled sharply. I knew it was regular. And you let people say I lived there for free. I didn't want to get in the middle. The sentence almost made me smile. Everyone in my family had a version of that phrase. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to embarrass you. I didn't want to upset your mother. Somehow, staying out of the middle always required me to remain underneath it. Emily pushed the envelope toward me. I didn't know Mom was asking relatives for money like that. I believe you might not have known everything. Relief flashed across her face too soon. But you knew enough. Her hand stopped. Sophie, you knew I paid rent. You knew you didn't support me financially. You knew people thought both of those things were false. I never asked for any of this. Neither did I. She looked toward the living room, then back at me. I'll fix it with Daniel. That's your decision. So don't send the file. There it was. The real reason for the visit. Why? Because I'm telling you I'll fix it. With Daniel. Yes. What about Rebecca? Her jaw tightened. Why does Rebecca need details about my marriage? She doesn't. She needs accurate information about money she sent for me. Emily rubbed one hand over her forehead. Can't you just say Mom misunderstood things? No. Why not? Because she didn't misunderstand when she told people not to contact me. That doesn't mean she was trying to hurt you. I didn't say it did. You're making her sound like a criminal. No. You are hearing facts and deciding they sound worse than the version you prefer. Emily stared at me. Then her voice dropped. Just call it a misunderstanding. I thought about the wedding. The table by the service door. Her saying not today, as if my humiliation had been something I scheduled. The engagement dinner. The praise she accepted. All the moments I had made myself smaller so she didn't have to feel uncomfortable. I won't call a lie a misunderstanding so you can keep the good parts of it. Her face went rigid. That's what you think this is? Me keeping the good parts? Yes. The answer came without heat. That seemed to hurt her more. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she picked up the envelope. You're going to destroy this family over receipts. I walked to the door and opened it. I'm going to stop lying about what the receipts say. She left without another word. My hands shook after the door closed. That was becoming familiar. The boundary came first. The fear arrived afterward. It didn't make the boundary wrong. At noon, I sent the file. The message above it was 4 sentences. I'm not asking anyone to choose sides. I'm correcting factual claims about me and money sent in my name. The attached records are limited to information I own or that the sender voluntarily provided. Please contact me directly if you ever receive a request for support on my behalf. I am not asking anyone to send me money. Send. 8 recipients. Then mark. Then Emily. I closed the laptop. For 9 minutes, nothing happened. At minute 10, Rebecca replied. I am sorry I didn't ask you. I should have. David's response came next. Then where did the money go? I answered. I can't trace your transfer after it entered Mom and Dad's account. You'll need to ask them. Hannah. Your mom just told me to ignore anything you send because you're unstable. I'm keeping your email. Uncle Peter. This is too much. Families should not keep spreadsheets on each other. I didn't respond. A cousin I barely spoke to sent nothing. That was fine. The goal had never been unanimous belief. By late afternoon, the shape of the problem had changed. People were no longer asking me why I was angry. They were asking Mom what they had been told. I knew, because they told me. Rebecca wrote. I asked Linda why she said you weren't paying rent. She said she meant you weren't paying enough to cover everything. David. I asked for a breakdown. Mark told me everything was household money. Hannah. I told her I'll ask you directly from now on. She hung up on me. None of those messages made me happy. That surprised me. For so long, I had imagined what it would feel like if people finally questioned Mom. I expected triumph. Instead, I felt tired, relieved, and a little sad that the truth required this much administrative work just to occupy the same room as a lie. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. I've been trying to reconcile what I was told with what I saw at the venue. Emily has now told me she knew you paid rent. I only need one factual answer from you. Did she ever financially support you after your divorce? I read it twice. He wasn't asking whether Emily was a good person. Wasn't asking whether Mom manipulated her. Wasn't asking me to explain their marriage. One factual question. My answer required one word. No. The typing indicator appeared. Then, thank you. That's all I needed. I set the phone down. Whatever happened between them next belonged to them. The urge to protect Emily rose anyway. Maybe I should send another message. Clarify that she had helped emotionally sometimes. Mention that she called during the divorce. Explain that none of this meant she was a terrible sister. My thumb touched the screen, then stopped. That would have been the old job. Absorb the discomfort. Round every sharp edge. Make sure no one else had to feel the full weight of what they had allowed. The phone stayed face down. By 6, Mom had called 11 times. No voicemail until the 12th. Sophie, this has gone far enough. Call me. I listened once, then switched our conversation to text. I will discuss financial claims in writing only. Her answer came almost immediately. You have humiliated your own mother. I stared at the sentence. A month earlier, it would have pulled me into an argument about intention. Instead, I corrected factual claims about my own finances. She replied with a paragraph. I didn't read it immediately. That was another new thing. My attention no longer belonged to whoever demanded it fastest. Rebecca texted it while I was making dinner. I'm not sending Linda money anymore, unless I know exactly what it's for. A few minutes later, David. From now on, I want receipts if anyone asks me to cover something. Hannah. If someone says you need help, I'm asking you. That was the collapse. Not screaming. Not a public confession. Not Mom losing everyone. The rules around her changed. Trust was no longer automatic. Money was no longer sent because she said a daughter needed saving. People had started asking questions, and questions were the one thing her version of me had been designed to prevent. Dad came to my apartment the next evening. This time he texted from downstairs first. I let him up. He remained standing near the door. Your mother hasn't slept. I'm sorry she's upset. Rebecca won't speak to her. That's between them. David is demanding receipts like we're strangers. He sent money for a stated purpose. He can ask questions about it. Dad rubbed both hands down his face. You don't understand what you've done. The words almost made me laugh. I understand exactly what I did. You made everyone suspicious. No. I gave them information. Same thing. No. His voice rose. This family is falling apart. People asking questions is not the family falling apart. You always have to be technically right. That phrase had followed me since childhood. Technically right. As if accuracy became a character flaw once it inconvenienced someone. Dad looked around my apartment. Then back at me. You could fix this. How? Tell everyone it got blown out of proportion. Did it? You know how your mother talks. That isn't an answer. She was trying to protect you. By telling people I was unstable after I asked her not to? Dad's shoulders dropped. Do you need her to be the villain? No. That answer came easily. I need her to stop using me. The room went quiet. Dad's phone buzzed. He ignored it. Then he said, "So that's it? You're just done helping us?" The question carried more truth than anything else he had said. Helping. Money. Paperwork. Emergency expenses. Last-minute rescues. The endless small transfers that happened because it was easier to send $200 than spend an hour being called selfish. My banking app was still open on the counter from paying the workshop fee. Below my savings transfer was another recurring payment. Carter Family Extras. A small amount every month. Not enough to ruin me. Enough to keep the door open. Dad followed my eyes. Sophie. I tapped the payment. Cancel recurring transfer. My thumb hovered for 1 second. Then pressed yes. Confirmation appeared. Dad stared at the screen. Are you serious? Financially? I locked the phone. Yes. The look on his face hurt. Not because I doubted the decision. Because some part of me still wanted him to understand why I had made it. Maybe that part would always exist. But wanting understanding no longer meant I had to purchase it. Dad picked up his keys. You're going to regret treating your parents like strangers. I opened the door. No. I'm going to learn what our relationship looks like when money isn't doing the work. He left. The apartment door clicked shut behind him. For several seconds, I stood there, with one hand still on the knob. Then my laptop chimed. A reminder for the leadership workshop appeared on the screen. Orientation materials available. A week earlier, I might have dismissed it and reopened the family messages. Instead, I made tea, opened the orientation packet, and let my parents solve the problem I had finally stopped paying to make disappear. 2 weeks after Dad left my apartment, nothing exploded. That surprised me more than I wanted to admit. No one was arrested. No one lost a house. Mom did not call a dramatic meeting and confess to everyone she had lied about me for years. Life did something less theatrical and, in some ways, more satisfying. It adjusted. Rebecca stopped sending Mom money. David told Dad that any future request for help would need an amount, a purpose, and receipts afterward. Hannah sent me one message that said, "If anyone tells me you need something, I'm asking you first." A few relatives stopped contacting me altogether. One uncle told Rebecca, who later repeated it to me, that keeping records on your own parents was a sad way to live. I didn't call him to defend myself. That might have been the strangest change of all. For years, any criticism had felt like a summons. Somebody misunderstood me? Explain. Somebody thought I was selfish? Prove otherwise. Somebody said Mom had done everything for me? Start listing all the things I had done in return until the conversation became another unpaid job. Now I could let a person be wrong about me without treating it like an emergency. Mark and Linda still owed the remaining $25,000 on the wedding venue agreement. I knew that because Dad had told me before I cut off the recurring transfer. And because Emily mentioned the payment schedule later. Daniel and Emily had already put $17,000 of their own savings toward the bill on the wedding night. According to Emily, that meant their honeymoon became 4 days at the coast instead of the international trip they had planned, and the new living room furniture would wait. She told me this as though I had personally canceled the flights. I listened. Then I said, "That sounds disappointing." Nothing more. I did not offer money. I did not apologize for an invoice I had never signed. The first morning of my leadership workshop arrived on a Thursday. I nearly missed the opening session because my phone lit up 3 times while I was getting dressed. Mom. Dad. Then Mom again. The old reflex moved through me so naturally that my hand was already reaching toward the screen. Something must have happened. Maybe the payment plan. Maybe Rebecca. Maybe Mom was sick. The thought sequence was automatic. Need. Urgency. Responsibility. Then I saw the time. 7:12 in the morning. My workshop started at 8:30. Nothing in their messages said emergency. Mom had written only, "We need to talk." Dad. Call your mother. The third message. You can't avoid us forever. I put the phone in my bag. At 8:25, I was sitting in a conference room with 23 other people from nonprofits, city programs, and community organizations across North Carolina. For the next 3 hours, nobody asked me to explain my divorce. Nobody asked whether I loved my mother. Nobody treated my bank account like a shared utility. We discussed oversight, leadership, and what happens when an organization builds its entire system around one person, quietly fixing everyone else's mistakes. That last discussion stayed with me. The instructor said, "If a process only works because one reliable person keeps absorbing every failure, you don't have a strong process, you have an exhausted person." My pen stopped. For a second, I saw the wedding, the venue folder, Emily saying, "Sophie was supposed to handle the rest." Then Dad standing in my apartment asking if I was done helping them. A laugh almost escaped me. Apparently, I had spent years doing unpaid organizational risk management for people who thought spreadsheets were my personality defect. During the lunch break, I checked my phone. 11 message. None were emergencies. I turned notifications off again. That evening, I ordered dinner from a place I liked, instead of driving to my parents' house to be cornered around their kitchen table. It felt almost embarrassingly small, but small decisions were how my old life had been built too. One yes at a time. So maybe a new one could be built out of no. Emily came over the following Saturday. This time she texted first. "Can I come by? I need to talk to you." I almost said no. Then I decided I was willing to hear her. Willing was not the same as obligated. She arrived carrying no envelope, no budget folder, nothing to put between us. We sat in my living room. Her wedding ring caught the light when she folded her hands. "Daniel and I have been fighting." "I'm sorry." Her mouth tightened. "He doesn't trust what I tell him about money now." I said nothing. "He went back through the wedding budget." "That's between you two." "I know." She looked toward the window. "He asked me to tell him exactly what I knew about you living with Mom and Dad." "And what did you tell him? That you paid rent?" There was a long pause. "And that I knew." The room stayed still around us. No music. No television. Just the faint sound of traffic outside. Emily rubbed her thumb over the edge of her ring. "He asked why I let his parents think I supported you." "What did you say?" "That Mom always talked like that." Did that answer his question? No. Something about the way she said it made me ache. Not because I wanted her marriage damaged. I didn't. But for years, vague sentences had protected her. "Mom always talks like that. Dad didn't mean it. You know how things are." That kind of language worked when nobody demanded a fact afterward. Daniel apparently had. Emily looked at me. "He wants us to keep our money separate from Mom and Dad's requests unless we both know exactly what it's for." "That sounds like something the two of you should decide." "You don't think that's extreme?" "No." Her eyebrows lifted. "Of course you don't." There was the familiar edge. For a moment, I almost stepped into the old dance. Defend. Explain. Calm her down. Instead, I waited. Emily looked away first. "He also wants me to correct what his parents were told." "Okay. That. I never supported you financially. That would be accurate." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You make everything sound so clinical. Would you prefer inaccurate?" "That's not what I meant." "I know." Her face softened for half a second, then hardened again. "You could have protected me." The sentence was so familiar that I felt tired before I felt angry. From what? From Daniel, thinking I lied to him. "Did you?" "You know it wasn't that simple." "No. I know you let him believe something you knew wasn't true. That's different from lying. Maybe to you." She leaned forward. "You answered him with one word, Sophie. No explanation, no context, nothing about the times I called you or checked on you. He asked whether you financially supported me. And you couldn't say I helped in other ways." "I could have." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I was done dressing up other people's answers. Because every time someone asked a question about what had happened to me, I had learned to include enough softness that nobody else had to feel guilty. Because the moment I added context, Emily would have used it to turn no into sort of. I kept the answer shorter. Because that wasn't what he asked." Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. "You wanted him to think the worst of me." "No, you had to know what that answer would do." I knew what the truth was. That's the same thing. It isn't. Emily stood and walked 2 steps toward the window. For a second, I saw us as children. Me cleaning up after a craft project because Mom said Emily was too young. Me taking the blame for missing cupcakes because I had been told I should have checked the order. Emily standing in the doorway while I learned that being older meant being responsible for whatever happened near me. She turned. So what now? You just don't want a sister? That isn't what I said. Then tell me what you want. For once, I had an answer ready. I want you to stop asking me to protect an image of you that depended on making me smaller. Her face changed. I continued before fear could make me soften it. If you tell people you supported me, correct it. If Mom sends you to pressure me, don't come. If you and Daniel have problems because of what you told him, deal with those problems with Daniel. Don't make them mine. You expect me to apologize forever? No. That stopped her. I'm not asking for forever. Then what are you asking for? Different behavior. She stared at me. No dramatic reconciliation followed. No hug. No promise that we would rebuild everything. Emily picked up her purse. At the door, she said, I don't know if I can be the sister you suddenly expect me to be. My hand rested on the knob. I'm not asking you to become someone else. I'm telling you what I'll participate in. She left. The sadness came afterward. It sat beside me on the couch for almost an hour. Boundaries had not turned me into stone. They had simply stopped sadness from automatically becoming surrender. 3 days later, Mom emailed. The subject line was, enough. The message was long enough that I had to scroll. She was sorry I had felt humiliated at the wedding. She and Dad had done what parents were supposed to do when I came home after my marriage failed. Maybe she had used the wrong words with Rebecca. Maybe people had interpreted things differently. No parent kept a perfect accounting of everything they spent on a child. I had caused more damage than I understood. Rebecca was treating her like a thief. David was insulting Dad by asking for receipts. Emily's new marriage was under stress. Mom had barely slept. Then came the sentence I had been expecting. You've punished us enough. I read it twice. Punished. As if stopping access was an attack. As if telling 6 people the truth about my own rent payments had been a sentence I imposed on her. A reply formed almost instantly. I began typing. You told people I was unemployed. Delete. You lied about the rent. Delete. You used my divorce. Delete. For 10 minutes, I wrote the answer I had been trained to write. An answer that anticipated every objection. An answer that proved I was reasonable. An answer designed to win a hearing no one had formally convened. Then I deleted all of it. 4 sentences remained. I'm not debating whether my records are real. Do not use my name to request money or support. I will not contribute to expenses I did not agree to in advance. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Send. Mom replied, 7 minutes later. I did not open it. That was my answer too. A month passed. Then Dad called on a Tuesday evening. I answered because low contact was not no contact. At least not yet. Hey. His voice sounded careful. How are you? Fine. You? We've been better. I waited. The car needs work. There it was. Not hello. Not really. A runway. How much? Just under 2,800. That's a lot. We weren't expecting it. I'm sorry. Another pause. I could practically feel the old script waiting between us. Dad cleared his throat. Things have been tight since the wedding. I know. Your mother's been trying to catch up. Okay. You know we would help you if the situation were reversed. That sentence reached into a very old place. Images came immediately. The carriage apartment. Mom bringing me soup the first week after I left my husband. Dad fixing the lock on the back door. The night I sat on their patio at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. Those things were real. So were the rent payments. So were the lies afterward. Gratitude did not require me to erase half the record. Dad said, we housed you when you had nowhere else. There it was. The invoice beneath every gift. My fingers tightened around the phone. And I'm grateful. He exhaled, almost relieved. I knew you'd understand. I also paid rent. The relief disappeared. Sophie, both things can be true. This isn't about rent. I know. We're asking our daughter for help. You're asking me for money. Is there a difference? Yes. His voice hardened. So you're really going to leave us hanging? The old guilt came. Not as strong as before. But present. $2,800 would not destroy my finances. That was what made the test real. I could afford to save them from the inconvenience. I had done it dozens of times because saying yes was cheaper emotionally than saying no. My eyes moved toward the printed workshop schedule on my desk. Then toward my savings account statement beside it. 6 months of emergency expenses was almost fully funded. For me. Not for whoever called first. I'm going to let you handle your own bill. Dad went quiet. You've changed. Yes. I didn't say it angrily. His next words came softer. Your mother was right. This whole thing has made you hard. For a moment, the old Sophie wanted to correct that too. No, Dad, I still love you. No, I'm not hard. No. Please don't think. I stopped. You can think that. He ended the call a few seconds later. My hand shook after I put the phone down. Then it stopped. I did not transfer the money. Nothing terrible happened. That was worth remembering. The next morning arrived. So did I. A week later, Priya came over with takeout and asked whether I had ever received the wedding photos. I forgot about them. That sounds healthy. I searched my inbox. The photographer's gallery link had been sitting unopened for days. We clicked through. Emily under the arbor. Dad walking her down the aisle. Daniel laughing during the cake cutting. Mom, raising her glass. Then a wide reception shot appeared. The family table glowed beneath the warm lights. At the far edge of the photograph, almost cut off, was the little table by the service door. My chair. For years, I had studied photographs of myself like evidence against myself. Did I look too tired? Too heavy? Too tense? Was my smile weird? Could anyone tell I didn't belong? This time, I looked at the chair. Nothing more. Priya glanced at me. You okay? Yeah. And I was. The photograph had not changed. I had. The gallery closed. That weekend, I bought a dining table. Nothing extravagant. Solid wood. 4 chairs. Small enough for my apartment. I had looked at one months earlier and decided the money should stay in savings in case Mom and Dad needed something after the wedding. Now, my emergency fund was mine. My future expenses were mine. The table arrived on a Friday. I assembled 2 of the chairs myself and swore at the third until Priya came over and pointed out I had one bracket backward. Several months later, those 4 chairs were occupied. Priya brought salad. A coworker brought bread. Another friend arrived 15 minutes late but texted before she left home. Dinner was ordinary. That was the beauty of it. Nobody asked me to organize everyone else's plates. Nobody made a joke about what I owed them. Nobody decided my seat before I arrived. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed on the counter. Mom. For a moment, I considered leaving it there. Then I glanced at the screen. Family doesn't keep score. The same sentence Dad had used. The same sentence Mom had once used when I came home after my marriage ended. It had sounded generous then. Now I understood the missing half. They didn't want me keeping score because scores could be compared. Dates could be checked. Money could be traced as far as the evidence allowed. Stories could be tested against what actually happened. But this was no longer about proving anything to Mom. Maybe she would spend the rest of her life believing I had humiliated her. Maybe Dad would keep calling me difficult. Maybe Emily and I would eventually find a way to know each other without the old roles. Maybe we wouldn't. For the first time, none of those possibilities felt like instructions. I turned the phone face down. Someone asked me to pass the bread. I did. Then I sat back. My chair made a soft scrape against the floor as I pulled it closer to the table. A table I had bought with money I no longer kept waiting for someone else's emergency. A table surrounded by people I had invited. A place nobody had assigned to me. I had spent years trying to earn a better seat at their table. In the end, freedom was realizing I could build my own.